Tonight at 11:30, see Telly Savalas, James MacArthur, and Cliff Robertson in The Interns on the Best of CBS. Tonight at 11:30 on Channel 2.
Saigon will fall unless Thieu resigns. That's one view tonight as the Viet Cong marches on. From Palm Springs, the president has ordered Americans not to fight back if attacked.
KNXT, Los Angeles.
Here comes a big one! Whew! Got some water on that one. Funny thing is, I'm still thirsty.
How about the smokehouse almonds for a little nourishment?
They're great. Problem is, you can't stop nibbling.
I love that smokehouse flavor, too. Well, like they say, with smokehouse almonds, one nibble is never enough.
Blue Diamond Smokehouse Almonds. One nibble is never enough.
I'm Bill Guy, president of Blue Cross of Southern California, and people are really what we're all about. That's why we've committed all of our resources to making sure everybody can have the quality health care they need. Your health is our only concern, because people are Southern California's greatest resource.
Because of the following CBS News special broadcast, 60 Minutes will not be presented today.
At Salzburg, Henry Kissinger went public for the first time and threatened to resign. Did that surprise you?
Was that the first time he went public?
First time he went public, yes. But now, wait a minute. What you seem to be saying is it was not unexpected because he had done it before.
The fact that he had threatened to resign didn't surprise me.
He had done that in the White...
If that was the first time he went public, I guess it probably surprised me that he went public, yeah.
How many times had he done it in the White House?
Quite a few. Some major times and some minor.
On what issues?
Some major and some minor.
This is a CBS News special. Haldeman, The Nixon Years. Conversations with Mike Wallace. This portion of this broadcast is sponsored by Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
Mary and I took the kids camping this weekend. Being out there alone with them got me to thinking about how much they depend on us and on the life insurance program we have with the Northwestern Mutual. Our Northwestern agent told us he didn't believe in anyone buying more insurance than they could afford, but he did believe in increasing our coverage as our incomes and cost of living went up. Good advice. That way, our life insurance is always a real partner for us when we retire or if we should ever need something to fall back on. But most important, our life insurance would be a mighty strong partner for the kids if anything should happen to one of us. Life insurance as a partner. It's a secure feeling, especially if your partner's the Northwestern, the 7th largest life insurance company in America.
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
Ready, set, go. You've seen commercials where liquid or crystal drain openers tell you how fast they are. Well, I can beat them both with amazing drain power. Why don't I hurry? No need to. 1 second is all it takes. Watch. Drain power, incredibly fast. And it works without lye or acid. Get amazing drain power, the 1 second drain opener.
You can tell I'm a nature lover. But can you also tell I wear dentures? I do. And because I prefer things that are natural, I use Fast Teeth Denture Adhesive Powder. There's nothing synthetic about it. It's 100% natural. What's more, it gives my dentures a natural feeling, so comfortable, they almost seem like my own teeth. And Fast Teeth holds firm, so I can enjoy hard-to-eat foods with less worry.
Fast Teeth. Firm hold with that natural feeling.
Good evening. This is the second of 2 broadcasts based on 5.5 hours of filmed conversation with H.R. Haldeman, the man closest to Richard Nixon for 51 months of his presidency. In the first broadcast last Sunday, Mr. Haldeman talked of the White House tapes, his relationship with President Nixon, and his job as Chief of Staff. Mr. Haldeman is currently appealing his conviction on 3 federal charges growing out of the Watergate affair.
Haldeman's sole hobby in his White House years was taking home movies, and it turns out he had a purpose behind even that pastime. He is now in Los Angeles writing his memoirs and using the 8mm film he took to jog his memory. Altogether, he took some 25 hours of Super 8 color film. He acknowledged to us that the film itself, as well as its processing and printing, was paid for out of government funds. But he says that since he could get his camera into places that no one else could, and since he gave duplicates of all his films to the administration archives, it added up to a bargain for the government. Some of the scenes he shot showed the mighty at play. John Ehrlichman and Henry Kissinger at poolside in Florida before Ehrlichman went on a diet. A 1973 Camp David Easter holiday for the Haldemans and the Ehrlichmans. A smiling Mrs. Ehrlichman holds up a paper whose headline reads, "Probers Eyeing Haldeman." Her husband relaxes with the Washington Post comic strips. This is about as close a look as one gets at the presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains. Other places news cameras couldn't go. The regular Monday night Big Four dinner meetings in Haldeman's White House office, with Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Kissinger, and George Shultz being served hamburgers by White House mess attendants. Then, just plain home movies, an excited Rosemary Woods, Mr. Nixon's longtime secretary, going to meet the Pope in the Vatican. A Haldeman aide filmed this scene. An historic scene. The center figure with the president and John Ehrlichman is Judge Matthew Byrne, presiding justice in the Daniel Ellsberg trial in California. Judge Byrne, before the decision in that trial, perhaps at this very moment, being offered the job of director of the FBI to replace J. Edgar Hoover. A job offer the White House denied it made, but Judge Byrne later confirmed. Henry Kissinger landing at San Clemente at 6:30 in the morning on July the 13th, 1971. The big smile on Henry's face because he has just concluded the summit deal with the Chinese. And Henry has come around the world from Peking to California to report details of the triumph to his boss. Mr. Nixon knows at this moment that he has pulled off the greatest foreign policy coup of his White House years. That negotiation eventually took Bob Haldeman and his camera to China and the Great Wall, and to an uncharacteristic moment when Bob Haldeman came to the aid of a journalist. Security was tight, and CBS's Walter Cronkite had gotten separated from his camera crew. A smiling Haldeman brought Walter through the security blockade, one of the few cordial moments between Mr. Haldeman and the press in his White House years. Press and government are normally adversaries, but with the Nixon administration, adversaries were called enemies, and we were curious to hear Mr. Haldeman's comments about that relationship.
Bill Sapphire says Haldeman's detestation of the press ran nearly as deep as Nixon's. And Richard Nixon is quoted over and over again as saying, the press is the enemy.
A realistic recognition of an adversary relationship is different than detestation. And his point in his frequently repeated phrase that the press is the enemy was a point made to staff, cabinet, associates, to try and have them understand that the press is on the other side and that the press is not going to cooperate with you. Their mission is different than your mission, and you must recognize it as that, and you must deal with it that way.
You failed to realize then, and you still fail to realize, is that a professional journalist will report fairly and accurately, no matter what, no matter how he is going to vote. These are professional, trained, dedicated, fair people.
That, as a professional journalist, you have to believe, and I'm sure do.
And I suppose you, as a professional politician, have to believe otherwise.
As a professional politician, I don't have to believe otherwise, but as a matter of experience, I do believe otherwise.
Even your own press secretary, Ron Ziegler, ruminating about the press a month ago or so, acknowledged his words. We conducted probably the worst public relations and press program in the history of the United States in the way that we handled Watergate.
In the way that Watergate was handled, I would agree with him.
Is it decent, Mr. Haldeman, for the President of the United States to tell you that the Washington Post is going to have damnable problems with their television licenses for the reason that they are giving you a hard time on Watergate?
I would say that it probably isn't.
Did you intend to give them? Or shouldn't I say, didn't you intend to give them damnable problems? There were challenges to two of their most, or
was it talked about? They got both the licenses renewed. So
of course they got the licenses renewed, but there were friends of the Nixon administration who challenged them for two licenses. Certainly at the behest of, or with the unspoken assent of the White House.
But there's a great frustration in this country that was tapped quite effectively by Vice President Agnew in his Des Moines speech towards what is viewed by many, many millions of people as a biased attitude as far as the press is concerned. And it gets to the point where there is a desire to try to counterbalance that.
So you take away somebody's license?
No, so you compete with them for the license in the hope that you can gain a license to get on with a viewpoint that is more conducive to what we believe is right rather than to what they believe is right.
And cost them who knows how many hundreds of thousands of dollars, as you well know, to undertake to hold on to those licenses, legal fees, time, and so forth.
Well, but the procedure is set up for license challenges. There's nothing wrong with challenging a license. That's why they're subject to periodic renewal.
So that the president can say, let's give that one damnable problems.
No.
Who was Deep Throat?
I don't know.
Of course you don't know, but who do you think?
My assumption is that it is Mark Felt, but that's a popular assumption. We knew that Mark Felt was leaking FBI information, or we were told that Mark Felt was leaking FBI information. Mark Felt was a deputy director or associate director of the FBI, and we understood he was providing information to an individual in the Washington press.
You hate to let the words Washington Post pass your lips, don't you?
It wasn't the Washington Post, it was Time magazine.
Oh. He was feeding it to Time?
Mm-hmm. To a reporter at
And
Time.
Deep Throat was not feeding it to Bernstein and Woodward?
Well, for all I know, that's my assumption that I assume...
They are the people...
All right, well, let me give you my reasoning on Deep Throat. I assume that Deep Throat is somebody at the FBI because it's clearly somebody who, at least if you believe Woodward and Bernstein, and what they say Deep Throat told them. If he did tell them that, if there is a Deep Throat, then it was somebody who wasn't at the White House, because what they were told somebody in the inn at the White House would not have said. He would have known differently. So the FBI would be the only place that had enough knowledge, and yet limited knowledge in terms of White House realities, to provide the kind of information they got. And my assumption is that the FBI leaker is Felt, because it's my understanding he was leaking in one direction, and I assume if you leak here, you can leak there. Now, that's
Apparently he leaked better to the Washington Post. Best of all to the Washington Post.
Not necessarily. There were other people leaking to the Washington Post, too.
Well, I know, but the Washington Post broke the story. Don't you agree?
The Washington Post printed the leaks, some of which turned out to be correct, and some of which didn't. As they know and have almost directly said in their book, they were totally wrong on their October story on me.
Ron Ziegler apologized to the Washington Post.
Another error.
It was an error for Ron Ziegler to apologize? Why?
On an all-out basis, because the Post was often wrong, and in some of Ron's, and particularly Ron, the extrapolation has been that Ron's apology was for his major tirade against the Post, which was in connection with the story the Post ran on me, which was a false story. And Ron's tirade on that story was totally justified, in my opinion, and didn't deserve an apology.
We left that subject. A few moments later, Mr. Haldeman made a remarkable revelation about President Nixon's view of the vice presidency. That exchange began with a question about Governor John Connally.
What is there in John Connally? Apparently, Richard Nixon liked John Connally immensely. What was it?
He did. Connally is an extremely able man, an extremely astute politician, and a very effective leader. And I think these are all qualities that President Nixon admired in him. he was a man who was willing to get in and fight.
And now under indictment.
And we didn't have very many people in the administration who were willing to get in and fight.
What do you mean?
Just that.
We didn't have very many people who were willing to get in and fight. I'm sorry, I'm not.
Well, the fight is in Washington, as you well know, is a tough battle. The fight with Congress, the fight with the bureaucracy, the fight with the media, the fight with the opponents on any particular issue matter. And some people love battle for the sake of battle. Some people like to get in and go around. Other people prefer to be loved and to have things develop smoothly for them without having to get into the nitty-gritty of getting down and getting it done.
Would he have preferred Connally to Spiro Agnew for his vice president?
When?
Second term?
Second term, my opinion is yes.
How would he have gone about it?
Well, he and I talked about this possibility long before the start of the second term. In other words, substantially before the end of the first term, before we got to the time of the convention, with the thought that John Connally had the capability and the characteristics to be a superb vice president and to be a superb president.
Better than Agnew?
On an overall basis, candidly, yes. And for that reason, some thought was given in very exploratory sort of what if kind of imaginary terms. What if this could be done or that could be done? The thought leading to the idea of John Connally becoming vice president.
Was it discussed with Connally?
It was discussed with Connally, not right at the outset, but
later.
It was discussed with Connally at a later time, yes.
And he was agreeable?
I think he would have accepted if nominated and served if elected, yes. And it was explored on that basis with the thought of the possibility of an Agnew resignation prior to the end of the first term, which would then have permitted...
Wait, why would Agnew have resigned prior to the end of the first term?
With the thought that it was known that there were frustrations on Agnew's part in his role as vice president. It was felt that he might be interested in, he had an interest in moving on to other things. He had an interest in going into your business, as a matter of fact.
Television.
Other things. Yes. And
in other words, this had come up. There had been some discussion that maybe Agnew was going to say, well, fellas, I've had it.
That's right.
So Agnew out, Connally in.
That's right.
And this was before there was a breath of scandal, really.
Oh, yes. Before there was a breath of scandal, period. Because it was before even the thought of the problem with the grand jury had been raised with me. I think it was before the grand jury even began to sit.
Why did you not replace Spiro Agnew in '72 with John Connally?
Because the decision on balance of all the factors, pro, con, and otherwise, came down finally on the basis of the ultimate wisdom being to retain Agnew on the ticket.
But it's fascinating to hear that you were thinking about, the president was discussing the possibility of a resignation so that he could make use of the 25th Amendment to appoint a man, John Connally.
It was one of the what-ifs we thought about.
It would have been something, wouldn't it, if Spiro Agnew had been found to be in the trouble that he was in, and then John Connally had been vice president, and he also would have been indicted.
Well, the would have beens can boggle the imagination.
The one great summer of your life is here in Canada. Warm, friendly, spectacular, beautiful. Easy to get around in, easy to plan for. See your travel agent, auto club, or carrier. Canada, this summer. The
Jaguar XJ is neither all performance nor all luxury. During its design and development, Jaguar gave no absolute veto power to either stylist or engineer. For the Jaguar is a complete motor car, one that performs its function as a road car with agility and stamina, yet offers its owners those elusive qualities of grace, dignity, and exclusivity.
It took hours to clean this carpet with a leading foam cleaner. Now we'll do it again. This time with a Steamex. Steamex, with 6 power jets, works deep to get the dirt foam cleaners don't reach, while it refreshes your carpet pile. Now, how much dirt was left in this carpet? Steamex gets the dirt foam cleaners don't reach. Rent the pro. Rent a Steamex.
It's time for the news, and time for dinner, too. So while you're setting the table, why don't you pour everyone a nice cold glass of milk? Because you know 3 8-ounce glasses of milk give you more than half your recommended daily allowance of protein. So finish setting the table. Make sure everyone has milk. Then sit back and watch the news. And who knows, maybe someone else will do the dishes tonight. Wouldn't that make the news?
No other administration in American history ended the way the Nixon administration did, with investigations, trials, convictions, jail sentences, and the resignation of a president. But out of it all, one man survived. Indeed, one man's power grew, and that was Henry Kissinger, National Security Advisor to President Nixon, later, and still, Secretary of State. We asked Bob Haldeman about his former colleague. Was there much Sturm und Drang in the White House because of Henry Kissinger? Was he a difficult character in the White House?
I don't speak German, so I'm not sure what your question said, but I think I know what you meant, and yes.
He was tough to work with?
Yes, he was.
Because?
Because he, like I'm led to believe most geniuses, is a man of temperament, a man of high emotional positives and low emotional negatives.
All right. Now, at Salzburg, Henry Kissinger went public for the first time and threatened to resign. Did that surprise you?
Was that the first time he went public?
First time he went public, yes. Well, now, wait a minute. What you seem to be saying is it was not unexpected because he had done it before.
The fact that he had threatened to resign didn't surprise me.
He had done that in the White...
If that was the first time he went public, I guess it probably surprised me that he went public, yeah.
How many times had he done it in the White House?
Quite a few. Some major times and some minor.
On what issues?
Some major and some minor. Again, the first time, way back in early '69, when the basic pattern of the Vietnam plan had been evolved at least in concept, was basically a hardline position on Vietnam. It was not an instant ending of the war. There was therefore an unpopular position. It was Kissinger's strongly advocated position, and it was Nixon's strongly advocated position. In other words, those two firmly believed in the strategy and program that they had evolved.
The hard line.
Others did not firmly believe in it. We were in Key Biscayne, and something had come up that caused Kissinger who didn't know Nixon very well at that time, to read into something Nixon had said, or the way he had said it, or some sort of nuance that Kissinger is quite skilled at reading and interpreting. He had read this as being an indication, a signal, is a word that he likes to use, that the president was backing off of or away from the basic approach that they were on, and was tending to modify. He was wrong in this. We had a long talk in Key Biscayne, and he said, more regretfully than threateningly, I'm going to have to quit because it's clear that the president doesn't have confidence in me.
This was in the first few months of the administration.
As I recall, it was, yes.
And did you tell him that you would take that message to the president, or...
No. At that time, because I probed into what the basis was of his conclusion, and felt that I was on very sound ground in explaining to him that he was misreading at that point, that particular situation. And we talked it through in enormous detail because, as we had on many other occasions before and after.
Did Henry Kissinger ever threaten to resign on the issue of Israel?
Not on the issue of Israel, no. Well. But, this is important because it wasn't on the issue of Israel. But I don't know whether it was a direct threat to resign, but there were several times of great Kissinger concern about the procedural operation vis-a-vis the Middle East and Israel, because he was not the shot caller in that area, either with the president or in the development of policy. And that was a conscious decision, I think, on both his and the president's part, as a result of the fact that he was Jewish and the feeling that when we were taking the moves we were, that it would not be wise to be doing it with under the direction of a Jewish advisor. Also,
well, wait a minute.
In those days, and it seems impossible to believe today, but it was my understanding that it was felt that he would not be able to meet with the other side. And in dealing with that conflict, it was essential in the role we were taking that we be able to meet with both sides, and that Secretary Rogers was in a position where he could meet with the various heads of Arab states as well as the head of the Jewish state, Israel, whereas Kissinger would not be able even to go into an Arab nation, which is, as you see him embracing Sadat, a little hard to believe now.
Chuck Colson said that President Nixon considered Kissinger unstable at times. Is that a fact?
No, not in the sense of unstable in what would be popularly accepted. He recognized Henry's tendency to ups and downs, and Henry did have a tendency to ups and downs. He became quite enthusiastic and euphoric when things were going well, and quite despondent and sometimes outraged when things weren't going well. Just the opposite, incidentally, of Richard Nixon, which is one of the things that made them a good operating team. Richard Nixon's at his best when things aren't going well and at his worst when they are.
Perhaps the toughest decision of the president's first term was that to bomb Hanoi in what was called the Christmas bombing. Was there disagreement on that between the president and Henry Kissinger?
Absolutely not.
None?
No.
Various of your colleagues have written that Henry knew how to counterfeit anguish at the Christmas bombing, at the invasion of Cambodia, that he led the press somehow to believe that he was a good guy holding back the bad guys, or at worst, going along. Is that an accurate picture?
It's a question of perception, and I think to a degree it is accurate. I think that there were times when, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that was the result or the net effect of what he said or how he said it.
What you're saying is that he was as hawkish as could be in private councils, and then would go out of the private councils and lead some people to believe that he wasn't all that hawkish, really.
That may have been the result. I'm not sure that was his intent, although...
What would have been his intent, Mr. Haldeman?
His intent could very well have been, in that kind of an instance, to try to soften the impact of a hard policy, to try and develop some understanding of what was being done.
Kissinger was very worried about leaks, as were the rest of you. Did he have a major role in wiretapping newsmen and staffers, White House staffers?
He had a major role in the concern about leaks to begin with. And there, as a result of that concern, there was a program of wiretapping newspapermen and a few White House staffers. I don't know exactly how that program was set up.
So it'll have to come from
that wiretapping effort was set up somehow out of a decision between Kissinger and the president, or one or the other. Possibly, and I would guess probably with John Mitchell also involved, and was then put into motion.
So that Henry Kissinger knew that it was being done, likely knew the names of the White House staffers and newsmen who were going to be wiretapped, eavesdropped on.
That's my impression, yes, because when I came into this, I can only testify really on this as to my own personal knowledge. I became aware of the wiretapping when I was asked to start receiving the wiretapping reports.
Is it likely that Henry Kissinger would have approved the names of those to be wiretapped, White House aides and newsmen? In your estimation?
Henry or someone in his office would have had to have had a part in the listing of the names, because otherwise I don't know where the names could have come from.
Mm-hmm. Did it ever worry you that Henry himself might have been doing some of the leaking?
No, not in terms of the harmful leaks. I knew that Henry was providing background information to some reporters. He was doing it in the belief that it was helpful, and it probably was.
The story goes that you were quite concerned that Henry Kissinger was getting too much attention, too much credit, if you will, for what, in effect, you believed were the president's foreign policy accomplishments.
No. Again, there's a semi-sound basis for that, in the sense that if you go back to before the presidency, we took the position that we were going to approach the White House staff, our White House staff roles, following the Brownlow report to FDR, which was that we should be men with a passion for anonymity. And all of us started out on that basis. And we all believed it.
Did you write that into Henry Kissinger's contract?
No, he didn't have a contract. And didn't have to, because he was a firmer espouser of that concept than I was at the time, because he had been around a White House. He had seen the problem that arises from a White House aide who becomes a spokesman or a figure in his own right. And he was not at all anxious to become so.
A member of the cabinet told me that you used to chide Henry Kissinger, and quite seriously, if he failed to mention the president's name often enough in his briefings.
I don't think there's any validity to that, and I don't know when I would have ever chided a Henry Kissinger in front of a cabinet officer anyway. We talked about...
Conceivably, Henry told the cabinet officer.
Well, that's conceivable.
Why was Henry Kissinger so successful with the press and the rest of you so unsuccessful?
Because he tried.
Was it useful that he tried?
It was certainly useful for him as the...
Was it useful for the Nixon administration?
I think it probably was. But there's a mixed question there, and a tough judgment call. We got into it with Henry, we got into it with Ehrlichman and others, which is whether you sacrifice a lot when you become a spokesman, when you start dealing directly with the press. You become a figure in your own right. You lose the anonymity. And that is a real loss.
Why is Henry Kissinger the only major figure from the Nixon administration to survive?
Well, because he's the only one who was in no way implicated in the Watergate charges.
How did he manage that?
I'm not sure. Because when Watergate's extended to its whole scope of the bugging in all of its areas, Henry did have some degree of involvement. But he had no degree of involvement. Let's say the thing that, it wasn't Watergate really that brought about the departure and demise of what you call the principal White House figures. It was the Watergate cover-up. And Kissinger was never charged by anybody with having had any role in the Watergate cover-up. The rest of us all were. By the rest of us, really, the President and John Ehrlichman and me.
Well, things are looking up around here these days. For a while, Ed and I were really dreading a get-together with a life insurance agent. Oh, we knew with the children and all, we needed more protection. We didn't want to go through all the hassle. Well, there wasn't any fuss. Ed's dad recommended Northwestern Mutual Life, the 7th largest life insurance company in America, and a leader in low cost. The Northwestern agent really listened and answered our questions thoroughly. He said that these days people have more to do with their money than just buy life insurance. That made sense. Now we have the protection we can afford based upon what we really need. And we're convinced that the Northwestern does give us the best value for our money. And nowadays, that's important.
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
This portion of this broadcast was sponsored by Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years. Haldeman, the Nixon years, will continue after station identification. The Waltons face a family crisis in the special 2-hour drama, The Easter Story, tonight at 7:30, 6:30 Central on CBS.
The Great Western feeling. At Great Western Savings, you get the strength of assets over $4.5 billion, and so much more. You get the feeling that comes from knowing you put your savings in exactly the right place. That's the Great Western feeling.
KNXT, Los Angeles.
Farmers come to sell me fruit. I say, hold it. Is it fresh? I sniff. Check the color. Look, if it isn't fresh, I'm out of business.
My husband buys fresh fruit. I buy fresh bread. How? By squeezing. See? That's freshness. If it isn't fresh, I'm out of business.
Wonder bakes for freshness. Try the fresh taste of Wonder English muffins, too. At Wonder,
if it isn't fresh,
we're out of business.
Do you believe a guy could make a living doing this? Knock wood.
I can take them all in 5. Oh, maybe 6.
Ain't it a beauty?
The next time you knock on wood, make sure it's Weldwood. Beautiful, lasting Weldwood paneling in a full range of grains, textures, and prices. Weldwood paneling from U.S. Plywood. You can knock on it.
Though he acknowledges Richard Nixon remains something of an enigma to him, still Bob Haldeman says he knew the president better than did anyone else. We asked Mr. Haldeman to cast some light on the president's view of various prominent figures in the government. We began with a question about J. Edgar Hoover, late head of the FBI.
What did the president think of J. Edgar Hoover? Great admiration and personal affection. A close rapport going way back to the I guess, the Alger Hiss days.
Did Hoover feed him files from the FBI the way Hoover apparently fed other presidents?
I don't know how he fed other presidents. He did, in conversation, to my knowledge, provide sort of tidbit-type information. Some he would characterize as rumor, and some he would characterize as fact. About major figures.
In your presence?
Yeah.
For instance?
The principal one, and the one he did go into considerable detail on, is the one that's been made most public, which was the Martin Luther King stories, which he had sort of an abundance of. He had, Hoover had very deep-seated personal opinions, and he didn't hesitate to express those to a president. Mm-hmm. I had the feeling, I must say, that a lot of what Hoover was doing in this kind of thing was lobbying for the FBI. That he was saying, trying to provide information that would be of sort of academic interest or non-official interest to the president, but also trying to pique the president's curiosity and his respect for the FBI's ability to find things out and stay on top of things as a means of fighting for his agency in terms of presidential support. One of the things, for instance, that he constantly lobbied for was the extension of the program of FBI establishments in American embassies abroad. He had FBI agents and units in some of the key embassies, and he wanted to add more. And in most of his personal sessions with the president, he'd come away with a couple more. I'd have instructions afterwards to call state and have them set up a, I've forgotten what the correct title was, FBI attaché in several more embassies.
For the purpose of?
For the purpose, I presume, of intelligence gathering or maintaining liaison with intelligence gathering facilities in those countries as they related.
What was the CIA doing?
Well, there you get, this is an interesting question that I hope all of this investigation will somewhat get into, which is that there's a problem of having an intelligence agency for domestic intelligence and a separate intelligence agency for international intelligence, and dropping a curtain and saying neither one shall cross the border of the other. Because a lot of the domestic problems that the domestic agency has to deal with arise from or are directed by or are connected with activities in other countries.
What do you think of Richard Helms?
You're saying what did I think of him, or what did the president think of him? I don't believe that he had as much confidence in him and his overall direction of the agency as he had originally in Hoover's.
Why?
I'm not sure. Part of it was a feeling that what he got from the CIA wasn't particularly useful in many cases and was often not correct. There was a feeling that as with all other agencies, the CIA bureaucracy could be substantially improved, and that was the reason for bringing in a man who was not a CIA man. There was a feeling that there was an old schoolboy, old school tie atmosphere within the CIA that led to some non-useful personnel and some less than most effective operations.
Including two fellows who worked for the CIA in one capacity or another, Howard Hunt and James McCord.
Didn't have much to do with it at that time.
The president on one of the tapes says to you, "We protected Helms from one hell of a lot of things," and you said, "That's what Ehrlichman says." What did you protect Helms from?
I don't know. You'd have to ask Ehrlichman. That's, if I had known, I would have said, yes, I know.
John Mitchell. President Nixon promised the nation a new attorney general to replace that woolly-headed Ramsey Clark who was soft on crime. He was going to give us a law and order man, and he gave us John Mitchell. What was there in John Mitchell that President Nixon found so reassuring?
I think a great intelligence, a great self-confidence, a method of working that the president was comfortable in working with, a trustworthiness.
And what about Watergate?
I don't know where John Mitchell fits in Watergate.
Oh, Mr. Haldeman, come on.
I don't.
It's almost 3 years later. You certainly have figured this out by now.
No, I haven't.
What do you mean you don't know where he fits in Watergate?
Exactly that.
You don't know what he knew or when he knew it?
That's exactly right.
Did John Mitchell leave Washington because of Watergate or because of Martha Mitchell?
There's absolutely no question on that one. I can give you a totally unequivocal answer based on absolute knowledge, and that is because of Martha Mitchell.
How much of an...
Only.
And that was because... I mean, you say because of Martha Mitchell.
Right.
You mean, I want to go home, John, and he went?
It wasn't quite that simple.
Well, what was it?
There was a monumental problem with Martha, and it wasn't a matter of going home. It was a matter of leaving the re-election committee.
Oh, I'm not sure I understand.
Martha enjoyed being the wife of the Attorney General. Martha did not enjoy the problems of politics and the problems that a political campaign manager has.
Mm-hmm.
And the time when John got into the campaign was a very difficult time for Martha, and Martha made it a very difficult time for John.
How much of an embarrassment to the administration was Mrs. Mitchell?
Depends on how you look at it. Some people thought she was great, and some people thought she wasn't so great.
The president, according to Jeb Magruder, wanted nothing to do with her.
Now, that isn't true. The president had her with John as his guest at Camp David, which was, he rarely did with cabinet officers, and at Key Biscayne.
Was she an embarrassment?
There were times when she was, yes, in my opinion.
Chuck Colson remains one of the most intriguing characters in the Nixon White House. He apparently had special access to the president. You were, I'm told, afraid that he was end-running you. What was his special appeal for Mr. Nixon?
Well, he wasn't in running me. He was in there because I urged him to be in there because it made it possible for him to sit and talk with the president about a lot of political matters that before I had to sit and talk with the president about. And I welcomed Chuck Colson. I did not, in any sense, try to cut him off.
Wait a minute. But Gordon Strachan said every once in a while Mr. Haldeman would ask me, what is Colson doing? And when I didn't know, he'd turn to Larry Higby and ask the same thing. It was a sort of a joke. Nobody knew what Colson was doing.
Well, that has nothing to do with Colson being with the president, which is the thing you raised first. Now, there was some concern about what Colson was doing in some areas because he tended to function in a way that I don't believe a presidential aide should function, which is to automatically carry out literally all of the president's orders. I saw, and all the rest of the senior assistants saw, one of our principal duties being that of not carrying out some orders, as well as that of carrying out others.
Obviously, you've opened up a fascinating... what orders didn't you carry out?
There's lots.
Give me an example.
Orders...
Haldeman, the loyal German, not carrying out...
It wasn't a matter of disloyalty, it was a matter of loyalty and not carrying them out. One of the means by which the president let off steam was to issue orders that were clearly orders not intended to be carried out.
Can you think of times when the president said, Bob, I want this done, and you knew that it was the wrong thing to be done, that he said it when he was hot, and you said, yes, Mr. President, and then you went out and didn't do it?
Yes.
Example?
Example, in the leak area, since that's an area that's been covered. The president called me into his room between meetings. He was in a rush, and he said, I want lie detector tests given to, and he listed categories of people. Said, I want them done today. I don't want any arguments back, you know, and put it in some of his
expletives,
blunter expletive type language, I guess. And this is an order.
And you said, yes, sir?
I said, yes, sir, and left because he was mad. I went out and did not do what he told me to do. And so he blew up. He said, I told you to get it done, and I expect you to get it done. And I said, Mr. President, I haven't done anything on it. I don't intend to. I think it's a bad idea. I bought the time. The next day, he said, what have you done on that? And he kind of laughed, and I said, I haven't done anything. And he said, I knew you wouldn't. And I said, well, I knew you knew I wouldn't, but at the time I had to agree.
You liked John Dean. You trusted him.
I wouldn't say that I particularly liked him.
You trusted him?
I trusted him, and I relied upon him, worked with him, yes.
Admired him?
Not particularly admired, no.
The reason I say it is that on a tape of September 15th of '72, you said, John, you were talking to the president, he is one of the quiet guys that gets a lot done.
That's right.
Good move bringing Dean in. He's moving ruthlessly on the investigation of McGovern people, Kennedy stuff. How did you feel when you realized that John Dean was going to the prosecution?
Well, when I first was told by him that he was going to the prosecution, I thought he was doing it on a constructive basis, and I was all for it.
Well, it turned out it was on a constructive basis.
No, it turned out it wasn't.
Well, I suppose that's in the eye of the beholder, but what he was doing was... There are some who regard Dean as a patriot who finally acknowledged error, turned state's evidence, uncovered Watergate. Surely you believe that it should have been uncovered, Mr.
I absolutely believe it should have been uncovered. I'm not sure that he has uncovered it. He has laid out a story, parts of which may be valid, and parts of which certainly are true, parts of which I know are not.
Yes, but at this late date, it seems quite apparent that what John Dean was saying has been found persuasive by the courts, by the Watergate Committee, apparently by the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, because he resigned, at least partially because of the information that Dean was willing to put on the record.
No, he resigned because of of what happened as a result of that, but not as a result of the information that Dean put on the record.
There was a fascinating irony in the tape of April 25th. You and the president were worrying about the March 21st conversation with Dean, and the president said, "I wonder if the son of a bitch had a recorder on him."
I remember the conversation.
And you do see the irony.
Oh, yes.
Mr. Haldeman, Dean confessed. Krogh confessed. Colson made a bargain with the prosecutor. Magruder. All of these fellows who worked either for you or with you. Has it never occurred to you to do the same?
I have to assume, Mike, that each of those people felt he was guilty of what he confessed of. If I felt I were guilty of any crime for which I've been charged or any other crime, I'd confess to the guilt of that.
It has never occurred to you that it might be wise at this moment to take your losses, get it over with, and start a new life?
Yes, it has occurred to me. If there were, in fact, a charge to which I was guilty, I could, in good conscience, plead guilty to it. And there is an enormous temptation to do that and to want to take a guilty plea under the kinds of pressures that have been put on us. I've spent 2 years of my life totally immersed in Watergate, the legal case, and all the civil cases and everything else that have fallen out of it. I've spent $400,000 in legal fees, which is $400,000 I don't have and can't pay, which is a mortgage on the rest of the earnings for the rest of my life. It's more money than I earned in the entire 20 years I was at J. Walter Thompson Company. And naturally, there's a temptation when you're faced with that expense and with the emotional drain on yourself and on your family, that a trial and an appeal and this entire process, to say it'd be better to get it all over with. But on the basis of living with yourself, you've got to be able to, at least, I can't speak for anyone else, I've got to be able to know that I'm in a truthful and honest position. And a plea of guilty would not be truthful or honest on my part, and so I can't do it.
It's fascinating, though. All these men who worked for Bob Haldeman, or for John Ehrlichman, or for John Mitchell, or for President Nixon, all of these fellows say, yes, mea culpa, I did it, I did it. And I did it. I can't believe that there was a palace revolution, that these guys did it without, I mean, it beggars the imagination that they did it without the understanding of somebody up top.
No, I don't think it does. I think we knew that there was an effort to contain the Watergate case, to deal with the publicity, to avoid the political fallout. I did not know that there was an illegal effort to obstruct justice involved in that. I am the only person who knows what my intent was. And I know that in none of those areas was my intent to commit the crime that I'm charged with having committed.
Mr. Haldeman, at your sentencing, your attorney, John Wilson, said whatever Bob Haldeman did, he did for the President of the United States. He was caught up in a political maelstrom that engulfed a lot of other good people. In effect, he then asked the judge to do for you, to treat you, in effect, the way that Gerald Ford had treated Richard Nixon. Didn't he?
I guess he did, in that he expressed the hope that there would be, I've forgotten how the statement went, but expressed the hope that there would be a similar view held, that the court was in somewhat the similar position.
Pardon. And therefore, it seems to me that he says, okay, my client's guilty, but he was acting out of loyalty for the President. The President was pardoned. My client should be pardoned.
No, see, a judge can't pardon.
Well, I understand that.
But so does John Wilson, and he wasn't asking for pardon. He was saying that there was a similarity to the positions in the effect that he could bring in, that his appeal was that a jail sentence, prison sentence, would not serve any purpose at that point.
Did you know ahead of time that John Ehrlichman was going to volunteer to do penance with the Pueblo Indians?
No, I didn't. That came as a complete surprise to me in the courtroom as we were standing before the bench.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
You and he are friends?
Yes.
He didn't confide in you?
No, but there hadn't been any occasion to.
Have you thought about doing penance yourself instead of going to prison?
I have appealed the verdict.
You don't look like a man who's on his way to jail.
Well, I hope I'm not.
H.R. Haldeman faces 30 months to 8 years in prison for his role in the Watergate matter. His chance for plea bargaining is long past. His appeal against conviction can be decided now only on questions of legal procedure or new evidence. He has come forward with no new evidence in these broadcasts. He has simply reaffirmed his plea of innocence. Now, he has set about writing a book on his White House years, a book, incidentally, for which he has not yet found a publisher. After that, he told me he has more books in mind. Textbooks, perhaps, on the workings of government. He is convinced that the activities that brought down the Nixon White House differed only in degree from those undertaken in previous administrations, but that the other devastating difference was that the Nixon men were caught. Bob Haldeman will spend his next years trying to understand and to explain, or perhaps not fully explain, Watergate. For Watergate is bound to mark his and his president's place in our history.
What's wrong, honey?
Oh, this itching. It's driving me nuts.
Now try Lanacaine.
Okay.
Lanacaine's great for itching, and it really works fast. I know. Feel better?
Thanks, honey. Feel great. That Lanacaine's amazing.
Amazing Lanacaine. Famous cream, new spray.
Smith Corona advances typewriters into the cartridge age. With this unique electric portable cartridge ribbon typewriter and Smith Corona cartridge ribbons, snap one in, and in 3 seconds you're typing on a fresh ribbon. For emphasis, snap in color ribbons or snap in a correction ribbon and errors disappear. The cartridge age typewriter, only from Smith Corona. It makes ribbon changing a snap.
Well, that's urban renewal for you. Did you come here often?
If unique is what you seek, Colt 45 malt liquor.
Hey, Jay. You know, I grew up in California, so naturally I got to know a little something about sunglasses. And that's why I wear polarized Foster Grants, especially when I drive, because nothing cuts through glare better than these. Of course, another reason I wear polarized Foster Grants is they look so good. And after all, when you're a star running back, you have to maintain a certain image.
Aww. Daddy!
This has been a CBS News special, Haldeman, The Nixon Years, Conversations with Mike Wallace. "60 Minutes will return next week at its regular time, 6 o'clock, 5 Central Time on most of these stations.